I'd like to present an introduction to this video series which covers the book French for Reading by Sandberg and Tatham. I'm Dave Dunaetz, and I want to explain to you what you can expect in this series. Now, the goal of the video series basically is to help graduate students pass their language exam in French. Now, I really want to help you understand French. I don't want you just to pass and forget everything. But realistically, perhaps the biggest value from this course comes from the fact that you will be pouring yourself into a language other than English, and you will probably learn more about English than you do about French. And since you are most likely in some field where language is incredibly important, since it's mainly the humanities and related fields that require a French exam, this will give you skills in understanding the very nature of language. It's often said that a fish can't understand what water is until he leaves the water. And the same way, you'll probably have a greater appreciation for the things that you can do with a language, most likely English, than you did before you started this course once you have finished. So, my goal is to help you pass your language exam, but it's also to make you more proficient in English, a better writer, a better communicator, a clearer thinker, and a better scholar. Now, to do so, I'm going to present a summary of each chapter from the book French for Reading, which is a very old book. It's a unique book. It's just not like any book that you've ever seen before. It's a textbook that's still in its first edition, almost 60 years after it was published. Because nobody wants to try to revise it. It's just so good the way that it is, with all kinds of flaws, and we'll point out some of those flaws as we go along, mainly typos, things like that. But there's a few doozies also in this book. Now, the lectures that I'm doing aren't going to make sense without the book, so I encourage you to follow the PowerPoints. You can download them if you want, or you can just watch them on the video series. The notes in each YouTube video will give you the link to download the PowerPoints. But to take notes actually in the book, if you've got it printed, if you've got a physical copy of the book, because the numbers on the slides and the titles of the slides generally will correspond to the sections in the book. So I'm going to follow the book really pretty closely so that you can go through the book in the most useful way possible. So I'm going to present a summary of each chapter. Each chapter will be divided up into typically 3 or 4 sections, and after each section there'll be an exercise, a translation exercise, where I'll give you sentences in English, or maybe sometimes phrases, and you will translate them. And then I will have a video that'll give the answers to the translations. So it'll be, the names of the videos will be like Chapter 1, Part 1. And then there'll be Chapter 1, Part 1 translation. And then you'll go to Chapter 1, Part 2. And Chapter 2, Part 2 translation, and so on, and you can work all the way through the chapter that way. Now, the exercises that I'm going to give you on the videos are pretty easy compared to the text that you're going to actually translate, and it's also pretty easy compared to the exercises in the textbook. So how to use these videos? So each chapter has its own playlist on YouTube, and so you'll watch the first video, and then the first video will end with an exercise, typically like 8 sentences. So stop the video at the end where you can still see the 8 sentences, and then you need to write down your translation, and that's super important that you actually work through the translation, because these are pretty easy. I'm using kind of like it's in educational language, it's called scaffolding. I'm starting off with things that are easy, and then you're going to go to the next step, and then you're going to go to the next step, and so that you can master the material in each chapter, and we'll follow that pattern in each chapter. So check your answers for each exercise with the following video, which has the translations of the exercise, and then go on to Chapter 1, Part 2, or Chapter 14, Part 2. And you'll work your way all the way through the videos. Now, assuming that you spend about 10 minutes on each exercise, so you watch the first video, work on the exercise for about 10 minutes, watch the translation, go to the second part of the chapter, work on the exercises for 10 minutes, watch the translation. Assuming that you'll follow that pattern, spending about 10 minutes on each exercise, it'll take you about 2 hours to go through each chapter. Sometimes a little bit longer, maybe sometimes a lot longer on one of these chapters, especially in the second half of the book. So it's going to take you, say, 2 hours to go through these lectures for each chapter. After you've gone through the lectures for each chapter, then you're going to go back to the textbook and you're going to work through the self-correcting exercises. And you'll notice right away that this textbook is really strange. It's got a bunch of squares, and you basically scroll down the page, you try to make the translation on the left column, and then you go down to the right next line, it'll give you the translation. That's the self-teaching aspect of this textbook. Now, the exercises in the book are a little bit more difficult than the exercises in the video, so you should do the video beforehand. So work through the self-correcting exercises in the book, and then translate the text at the end of the chapter. Or sometimes there's 2 short texts. So there's 3 major steps for each chapter. Work through the videos, work through the self-correcting exercises in the book, and then translate the text at the end of the chapter. Maybe just one of the texts at the end of the chapter if you've got a limited amount of energy. So going through the videos will take about 2 hours. Working through the self-correcting exercises in the book will take probably between an hour and a half and 3 hours. And then the translation of the text at the end of the chapter, again, maybe an hour and a half to 3 hours. If your language exam is for 2 hours, you might want to leave yourself just 2 hours to work on each translation. But work on it at least 2 hours. Don't give up because you're tired. You need to put a lot of effort into these translations. So that means, we've got 2 hours up here, an hour and a half to 3 hours here, an hour and a half to 3 hours there. So that means 5 to 8 hours per chapter. So you're not going to make it through this series in a weekend. This is a lot of work, and that's what getting a PhD or getting a graduate degree is about, is really forcing yourself to learn, doing all these exercises on your brain so that you come out academically stronger. So I would give yourself 6 to 8 weeks if you're studying full-time to make it through these videos and prepare yourself for your language exam. Now here's a few notes on this course. One is, this course only focuses on translation. You're not going to learn how to speak French. You're not going to learn how to write French. You're going to learn how to translate from French to English. And I'm going to emphasize what's known as the dynamic equivalent. I don't want you to make some stilted word-for-word translation, but I want you to create a translation that, if we call it dynamic translation, because it's supposed to have the same impact on the readers in English that the text would have on the readers in French. We're not looking for a word-for-word translation. We're looking to communicate the ideas so that you have the same impact with your translation as the original writer did on the original readers. Now, I'm assuming that most of you are adult learners, and that requires a special approach. It's difficult to learn a language as an adult. I teach a language. I teach French once a year. I'm actually a research psychologist the rest of the year. And we know that the adult brain is not designed for learning languages nearly as efficiently as a child's brain does. But if you're musically gifted, that part of your brain is pretty developed and pretty skilled. You can kind of learn a language like a child would if you're musically gifted. But if you're not musically gifted and you're an adult, you're going to have to learn French the hard way, a very cognitive way with lots of memorization, lots of exercises, lots of just spending a lot of effort trying to figure out the meaning of different things. Now, I personally learned French as an adult. Well, actually, I had taken first year French 3 times in high school and college, but that's a different story. I was a pastor in France for 17 years, and I learned French when I was there as an adult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on an appropriate andragogy. Now, what's an andragogy? Andragogy is pedagogy, is how you teach children, and andragogy is how adults learn. So I'm going to focus on your strengths as graduate students, which is, namely, it's your cognitive ability. You are probably pretty smart if you are taking this course. So we're going to be working on learning French with your frontal cortex, not necessarily Broca's region, which is where we usually learn languages. But you're gifted academically. You're gifted with a lot of cognitive ability, and that's what we're going to build upon. So I'm not going to try to teach you language in a natural context where you're developing relationships with people, things like that. We're going to do it very, in a sense, academically, looking at grammar and rules and how to translate, not how to speak. Now, I should also warn you that from a French perspective, my accent is not very good. I learned French as an adult. No matter where I go in France, as soon as I start talking, people will ask questions like, oh, where are you from? England or America? Or are you from Australia? Because we all tend to have the same accent when we speak French. So I've got what's known as a pretty good American accent. If you want to learn what French should sound like, you need to watch videos that are in French. This has an advantage for people that are learning French as a second language, is that you can actually understand the words that I say because the vowels will not be completely foreign sounding. My vowels tend to kind of be a mixture of the French and the American vowels. I tend to put more pauses in between words. The French do not put pauses in the words. Individual words don't have an accent on a specific syllable. The syllable is placed in function of the structure of the sentence. So you'll be able to understand me when I say something in French better than you would most likely an actual French person. But don't think that this is how French is spoken. You'll have to go to other courses to hear actual spoken French. Well, I hope you enjoy this course. I hope you get an awful lot out of it. I hope you find that some things are fun. I know you'll find it challenging, and I especially hope that you pass your language exam.